Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us again one more time this week for Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast number 270, recorded live on Monday, November 23rd, 2015. I am your host, Todd Klindt, and this week in the U.S. here, this week is the week of Thanksgiving, the week where we give thanks and all that. That's Thursday, which is probably Thursday is probably 2 days before this thing ends up getting put out. But anyway, Thursday the 26th is Thanksgiving. And one of the things that I'm thankful for, certainly my health, a man of my age, I still have all my hair, most of my hair, still got all my teeth. But I'm also thankful for Rackspace. And thankful for the flags and the PowerPoint templates that I haven't updated in like 4 years, and the paychecks they send me, and the fact that they make this whole podcast possible. So like me, join me in giving thanks to Rackspace. You can go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com and see all the wonderful SharePoint products that we have. And then you can go to www.rackspace.com/Microsoft and see all the other Microsoft products we have, because we have got all of it. If Microsoft made it, we sell it. We sell Azure, we sell Exchange, we sell Skype for Business, or whatever they're calling it this week. We've got Windows and SQL and everything. And soon, and I'll probably have to bring in a guest, but we're also getting into the Microsoft identity business. So I think it's not, we haven't had like a full launch yet, but that's coming up. But we're going to get into the ADFS business and the Azure AD business and all that. And that really complements all of our hybrid-y things, SharePoint and Office 365 and all that. But you'll be able to find all that out there. John Liu is saying in the chat room, John Liu 1, which I think is different from John Liu, is saying that we should sell Yammer. John, I think you know as well as I do that Yammer sells itself. Nobody needs to sell Yammer. It just flies off the shelf, and then it goes out and does whatever it is that Yammer does, but it sells itself. But anyway, sharepoint.rackspace.com. Go out there, chat those guys up in the chat room there, and tell them Todd sent you. And while you're out there on the internet, go to toddklindt.com, and there's toddklindt.com/blog. There's twitter.com/Todd Klindt. I'm on LinkedIn now. Go out there. I dare you to friend me on LinkedIn, and we can be chums or pals or amigos or freundas or whatever it is on LinkedIn. We can do that because I'm out there on LinkedIn now. All right. So let's get this. There we go, PowerPoint. All right. So for production notes, last week was pretty slow production. I recorded the last week's magnum opus number 269. I recorded that Monday night. And then Tuesday, my wife and I and my family went on vacation, and I was vacationing all week long, and then there was a bunch of snow here, and I almost didn't get home Friday. Great story about all that vacation. I'm not going to bore you fine folks about that, because I imagine you don't care at all about me or my family, so I'm not going to bore you all with that. But anyway, that's my long list of excuses for why 269 is not out yet. And so as of today, as of Monday the 23rd, the MP3 is out, the YouTube is out, the videos are out and all that. All I needed to do was blog it, but it didn't get done until this evening. So that was pretty slow. Hopefully this week will not be as slow. Lori's not around this week. She is vacationing this week, a much needed vacation away from the stress that is being the producer of the Todd Klindt podcast. She's off vacationing in parts unknown right now, having a wee of a time. And so that will be my excuse for this week's production being slow. On to my next production note, and John mentioned in the chat room, John Liu 1. Actually, I think it was John Liu that mentioned this. I don't know if John Liu 1, if they're related or anything like that. Right now, the chat room is in IRC, and he is wondering if we should look at it in Slack. And so we'll probably discuss that. Now, the more I discuss that on the podcast, I realize that's probably a discussion I should be having in the chat room and not so much in the podcast. But for those of you who don't use Slack, Slack is sort of like this, Centuries IRC. It's a chat thing, and there's channels and servers and all that. But it's kind of the next rev of that. It's got some nice features, things like you can inline videos and images. You can enable bots like Giphy that throw images out for things. And so that was one of the things that John was talking about. Again, we'll chat about it in the chat room, because they're really the folks that are impacted by it. The reason, and when John and I were talking about it earlier today, I told him there's kind of two reasons why we're in IRC and not Slack. Number one is inertia. because I've had this IRC chat room for 6 years now, or however long I've been doing this podcast, and it's just always been the thing. I use IRC anyway, and so it's just there and it's free. I use the Ars Technica IRC servers. I know those guys, and they were kind enough to let me host my channel there. So there's some inertia. It's just always been what we've used. Second, the other reason that I've not moved to Slack, I'm in a bunch of Slack teams and a bunch of Slack channel, like I'm in 5 Slack teams or something like that. Use it all the time, use it every day. The reason I didn't move the chat room over to it initially when I started playing with Slack is that it makes you sign up. And I didn't want to put that burden on folks. I can't believe that people give me a half hour, 45 minutes a week to sit in on this thing live in the chat room. I can't imagine putting another burden in front of them that they need to sign up for a thing and make a thing to make that happen. And so Louis Manetti in the chat room, he's like, oh my God, yes, put it on Slack. There's a Windows 10 mobile app for it. Yeah, there probably is. And so John and I were talking about that. John uses the web IRC client, which kind of stinks. It's just a little better than a fuzzy lollipop, but not a whole lot. I actually use Merc. I use a full Windows IRC client because I'm on IRC all the time. But I can see how if you use the web client, that the Slack web client or the Slack client, because it is free, would be better. So I'll chat with those guys in the chat room about it. They're in there now. They're mulling it over. Tim Cafferty is just amazed that people are actually using Windows 10 mobile, that's actually a thing. And you say that. I used to use Slack on my Windows phone, and the Slack app went away. It was like a third-party Slack app, and then Slack said, hey, we're going to make one, and then the third-party one went away. So I couldn't even do Slack on my phone. Now that I've got Android, though, the world is my oyster. There's apps for everything, including Slack. But so folks in the chat room, I can't really pay attention to it much right now. I'm kind of doing this podcast, but after the podcast is over, we'll talk about moving over to Slack. Obviously, John is in favor of it, and now we know that Louis is as well, or Lou Simonetti. Sorry, terrible, such small. Lou Simonetti. I know they're in favor of it. We'll see what everybody else says. While we're talking about things that can improve this podcast, and Lord knows the list of things that can improve this podcast is boundless and plentiful. Also, think about going out and filling out the survey. You can go to toddklindt.com/podcast survey, fill that out. It's like 2 or 3 questions, not a big deal. But let me know what you like about the podcast, what you don't like about the podcast, and I can start making some changes. And if something like moving the chat room to Slack is a thing that you want, well, then put that out there at toddklindt.com/podcast survey. Now, you're going to get frustrated when you fill this out, and this is all my fault. You're going to fill this out. You're going to lovingly give me your opinion because I care. I care what you think. And then when you click submit, you're going to get a nasty access denied error, and you're going to think that your opinion just evaporated into the ether. That is not the case. That is not the case at all. What you're getting an access denied on is the web part that shows all the responses, because you guys don't get to see that. So it's just a poorly programmed page. I'm lazy and all that. But honest to God, I promise that it's in there. Your feedback is noted in there. It's not like the old thing where you put your feedback in the thing and then on the other side of the door is a trash can. It's not like that at all. We really can see all the answers. And so Linda's in the chat room. She's doing that right next. She's like, I did a really great survey, very detailed. And then it gave me an error. I promise, Lynn, your results are in there. I would look at them now, but again, I'm in the middle of doing this podcast. I'm kind of busy right now, but I promise they're in there. We will look at all of your suggestions. Unless you're John Lou or John Lou 1 or John Lou 2, then we don't care. But other than that, we definitely care. And while I'm throwing links out, we're getting close to time to start hitting the charity drive hard. And that is the annual thing that I do, where I just encourage you to give to any charity that you want to give to. Or if you don't know of any, certainly I can tell you some of my favorite ones. But it is the season for that, Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that. And then my birthday's coming up in January. So don't give too much, because you're going to need to put a little bit back to buy me a good birthday present. But you can go to pointgowan.com/TK charity. Lori handles all that. It feels kind of weird for me to solicit that, so I let Lori do that at pointgowan.com/TK charity. But we tally it up every year. I used to match the donations every year until you guys started giving so much that I couldn't. Maybe I need to talk to the wife this year and see if maybe we can find some money on the couch and try to match them again this year. But we'll see. So go out there. All right, we are actually going to talk about some tech stuff tonight. A bunch of things. So the first thing, none of you have been able to listen to 269 because I have not published it yet. Published it out to my blog. Tim, that was for you. But at the end of 269, when I was doing my shameless self-promotion, I mentioned I might have something else coming up that I would announce. Well, I get to announce that right now. When I was out in Las Vegas, I ran into my good friend, Rich Campbell, and Rich and I do a bunch of the same speaking events and stuff like that. So we've hung out over the years. Rich also does a podcast. He does a couple of them, but the one that I'm most familiar with is Run As Radio. And we were sitting there chatting about things. And I said, Rich, I've never been on Run As Radio. And I think it would be great for me as a person if you let me be on Run As Radio. And he said, okay, fine, we can do that. So been working back and forth with Rich, and we're going to record that on Friday. So you can go to runasradio.com, and it's a bunch of stuff. So it's an IT Pro podcast for Microsoft folks. It's this kind of thing. He does half-hour interviews, and it's Exchange, sometimes in PowerShell and Windows and SharePoint and whatever. But Friday, I'm going to record it, and it's going to take him a couple of weeks to put it out there. He's got a bunch in the hopper. He is way more professional at this than I am. But we're going to record that Friday, and we're going to talk about SharePoint and hybrid, SharePoint 2013 and hybrid, SharePoint 2016 and hybrid, what the future for the IT Pro is, where hybrid fits into that, the cloud, all that. And then, so that'll be out there. Once that is out there on runasradio.com, of course, I'll blog it and tell you guys about it. But that is one of the things that I will be doing here in the next week. That will be after Thanksgiving. I will have a big belly full of turkey. I'll be about the size of a house. It will be glorious. And then I'll talk to Rich. And Rich is Canadian. I don't hold that against him. He's a good guy otherwise. But he is not, because since he's Canadian, he will not be partaking in Thanksgiving. So he will have the advantage over me. I will be fat and lethargic, filled with mashed potatoes and turkey, and he will be his regular vivacious self running around interviewing me. So it should be a good time. But that's Friday, and then it'll be out sometime after that. The next big news is SharePoint 2016, the beta 2. The deuce, the sequel is out, and you can go to blogs.office.com and find everything about that, the download links and all that kind of stuff. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. They've been telling us that it was going to come out this month. I kind of figured it would come out before Thanksgiving because of just the way vacations and all that work. Again, this is a good beta for us IT pros to look at. It's good IT pro stuff. Excuse me. And they've introduced a few new things to it. Definitely worth the time to download. Definitely worth the time to kick the tires on. I'm actually installing it in another VM right now in the background while this is going on. That's how excited I am about this. While I was on vacation, I almost did it while I was on vacation, but I just couldn't do it, mainly because the Wi-Fi at the place I was staying at was not great, or otherwise I'd tried to find a way. Joanne in the chat room is asking, is Project Server baked into SharePoint 2016 now? Yes, it is. There is no longer a standalone Project Server SKU. All the Project Server functionality is baked into SharePoint 2016. And they really did a lot of collapsing on that, which will be great for me when I finally publish the builds page. There is no longer a foundation, so there is no SharePoint 2016 foundation. Don't got to worry about those patches. There is no longer a SharePoint 2016 project server. Don't got to worry about those patches. It's just going to be SharePoint server, and you're going to turn bits on, and that will be a good thing. And that brings up another thing before I get too far into this. I have not forgotten about doing the builds for the SharePoint 2016 product. I just looked at this as an opportunity to do them better and then kind of got paralyzed by that. So within the next week, I promise you, I will have a blog post out there that has the SharePoint 2016 builds. Of course, we've just got the IT Pro preview and the beta 2 right now, but that is out there. I will have it. I am going to do all that. I think I might end up redoing it later. I've been playing with some stuff in the background in how to make that a little easier to consume, things like that. But if you have any suggestions about that, if you've been following my SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 builds pages and wiki pages and all that, if you have any suggestions for things you would like me to do better or differently, by all means, let me know. I'm at Todd Klindt on Twitter or todd.klindt at rackspace.com. So a couple of other things in the chat room. Robert Hostetler is installing the beta right now. I think you'll love it, Robert. It went very well for me. He said he's going to try to set up the new cloud search service application. I highly recommend that. I've got the blog post out there that walks through that. Now that's on SharePoint 2013, my blog post, but it's going to be very, very similar for SharePoint 2016. And I think that search service and getting all that set up is going to kind of be the foundation for hybrid as you're working in the future. And hybrid is the way you're going to go with SharePoint 2016. That's kind of the big push with SharePoint 2016. And with the search service application, that's one of those things where you can't like change that after you've installed it. So you don't have to rebuild your farm or anything. But if you build search and do a bunch of things with search and then decide to do the cloud search service later, you have to rebuild all that. So it's good to do that now if you want to. You can go out and read my blog post at toddklindt.com/happycssa. That's my blog post on how to do that in 2013. But again, it's going to be almost exactly the same in 2016. So I was going to talk about some of the other things that were in there. We found out at Ignite that SharePoint 2016 was no longer going to have the fancy profile sync in it, the FIM-based sync that was the bane of our existence in the SharePoint 2010 and 2013 worlds. But they do have support for MIM, so you'll be able to bolt that in. You'll be able to do the old SharePoint 2007 syncs, but if you want the fancy stuff, you got to do MIM. They've added all those pieces into Beta 2. They've got the DLP, the data loss protection stuff, is now in Beta 2. They've added the app launcher, and that's something that has existed in Office 365 for a while, but now it exists in SharePoint 2016 and different ways to handle all that. And then profile redirection, which is how to handle having profiles on-prem, profiles in Office 365, and how that works with Delve and all that. They've added the pieces for all that. So definitely a worthwhile upgrade. All kinds of great things in there. You definitely want to check that out. And you can go to blogs.office.com, and it's got all the links in there. And I need to start blogging. I've been holding back on blogging 2016 stuff. I've just been busy with some things at work, but I need to start hitting some of this stuff. If you have things that you'd like to see blogged, give me a shout. And if it's something that I played with in 2016, I will take a poke at it. But it's fun times. It's good stuff out there. Another story, a much sadder story that I saw last week, I think, I don't remember, is about Windows Phone. Now, you guys know I was a huge Windows Phone proponent back in the day, and then just finally got beaten down by the app gap, essentially. And I went to Android a few months ago and have just stuck with it and tried to do the Windows 10 mobile beta, and it's just not working very well. I know what everybody's saying, it's a beta, what do you expect? Well, I mean, I expect a certain level of it working, but I've got a couple of phones that they're not upgrading from build to build correctly, and it's just been a pain in the butt. So I saw this article last week at some point that was talking about the amount of market share that Windows Phone has. And this was at computerworld.com. And basically they're saying for the quarter that ended in September, they call it the September quarter, the quarter that ended in September, Windows Phone sold 6 million, the 6 million Windows Phones were sold. That makes it 1.7% of all the phones sold in that quarter. 1.7, so it was 6 million out of 300 and something, I forget what it was. 1.7% is a horrible percent. And what makes it even worse is that same quarter last year, it was 3%. So it's almost half of what it was. And at its high a year and a half ago or so, it was at 3.6%. It's just abysmal. And I've been talking to folks about it because I love the Windows Phone OS, but there's just nothing to do with it. And Jeff Shuey and I, a buddy of mine, were talking about it on Twitter, and he's got some blog posts on it, and he was saying that, the continuum thing and all that might help it out. I don't think there's anything that Microsoft can do. Anything. The new Lumia 950s are out now, and people have got those, and they love them, and the XLs. But I think Windows Phone is doomed as long as there's no apps, and that's just they have to fix that. That's the issue. And when Jeff and I were chatting about it on Twitter, he's like, the app gap is not new. When people got the the Windows Phone. They knew about the app gap. That shouldn't be a surprise. And my response to him was, yes, I knew about it, but I had been told repeatedly by people at Microsoft that the app gap was going to get better, that there were going to be more apps, and instead it got worse. Apps that used to work quit working, that they got pulled out of the store, and people quit supporting them. And that was the thing that people did not expect. And it was so that's, I mean, I got 2 Windows phones sitting on my desk now. I love them. I hate the Android OS, but at least I can do something with it. But just, so it's selling half what it was a year ago. So now I've got a bunch of things. I keep wanting to change my slide, and I don't need to do that. A bunch of things. And you guys that like to ridicule me and make fun of me in the chat room, the hecklers, the hooligans, you'll like this next part. I do want to say before I talk about what I did next, that I did it all for you guys. And I did it so that I could talk about it on this podcast. And I did it because it's just the thing that I want. But I installed this thing over the weekend called Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code is a free pared down version of Visual Studio. It's and you can get it at code.visualstudio.com. If you can download it, it's a free download. And it's essentially just kind of the IDE of Visual Studio. It's, again, not the whole deal. You still got to pay $1 bazillion a month to have full Visual Studio. But code.visualstudio.com is out there and is free. So I downloaded that and installed it. It was pretty painless. And for those of you that have ever installed Visual Studio, the full one before, it is not painless. It takes about 7 days. And I think there's an algorithm in it somewhere that says when you install Visual Studio, it has to take all but like 200 meg of your C drive. It just fills your hard drive up. It takes forever to install. It's horrible. Code is not too bad if you install Visual Studio Code. And in the chat room, people are dropping like flies. Lou Simonetti is saying that hell just froze over. SharePoint Tim is saying that he needs a blanket. So the reason that I did that was, number one, because I had seen some tweets and stuff about it, and I was curious, what it was. But the other thing was there is now PowerShell support for Visual Studio, which is something that people have wanted forever, because you get people that use Visual Studio for other things, for developing, especially SharePoint folks. They want to do some PowerShell. You couldn't do PowerShell inside of Visual Studio. The ISE that comes with PowerShell is pretty good, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But for folks that are used to Visual Studio, they wanted to stay in Visual Studio, and there was never a great way to do that. And so the reason that I installed Code was because I wanted to try out this new PowerShell extension. And it worked pretty well. I'm not sure. And I'm going to switch over from the ISE. And again, we're going to talk about the ISE in a minute. But it's nice if you're already in Visual Studio and want to add some PowerShell. So this PowerShell extension for Visual Studio works in Code, works in the full version of Visual Studio also, and it's free. I installed it in Code, and it was pretty simple to install. Visual Studio has this concept of a command palette, and you can install it from the command palette. The instructions that I use, you hit Control-Shift-P, that gets you up in the command palette up at the top, and you can type stuff in. I typed extension, and it auto filled it all out to install extensions. I hit enter, and then it's got a list of all the extensions. You type PowerShell, you hit enter, and then it just, it finds it, you install it. You have to restart a Visual Studio Code for that to work. But then once it does, then you can do all your PowerShell stuff, and it it does the IntelliSense and all that. It doesn't handle things like parameters as well. So for instance, one of the things that I tried, I opened up some PowerShell code that I had, and sure enough, syntax highlighting and all that kind of stuff. But one of the ones that I used, that I was testing it on, was write host. And when you use write host, and I know all you PowerShell folks are out there screaming at your radios right now that I'm using write host. I did it on purpose. There's a reason for that. But one of the things you can do with write host that you can't do with the more proper write output is control colors, like background color, foreground color for the font, because it knows that it's writing to the host. It doesn't know if it's writing to a file or whatever, like output does. So with write host, you can specify those things. So I did, write host -B tab background color. One of the things that the ISE will do, at least I believe it will do it, is it will give you a list of the colors that you can use. So let me I should have tested this. I've used so many PowerShell things that I can't remember. Yeah. So when you do right host / background color, as soon as you put the background color parameter in and hit space, you get a drop down of all of the proper colors in there. So black and cyan and red and all that kind of stuff, which makes it super easy. For that one, it's not a big deal, but for any other parameter that has built-in values it will accept, that functionality is great. Code doesn't do that. So with code, I had to do like -B, and then it would give me blue and black, and -C, and it would give me cyan. But if I just gave it a dash, it wouldn't give me all of them. And that was kind of a pain. I didn't like that. Other than that, I mean, it worked pretty well. If you're a Visual Studio person already and you do some PowerShell here and there, I think this will be great. But that extension is free. Visual Studio Code is free. In the chat room, folks are remembering that I did the Visual Studio session on load balancing at the SharePoint conference a couple of years ago. I do have Visual Studio installed on a couple of machines. It's kind of that whole know your enemy, you know, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer sort of deal. So I do have Visual Studio. I do use it for load testing. I use it also just to hammer sites to make sure when things go down, things like that. So Robert Hostetler's asking, does code let you bring up IntelliSense via Control K? You know, I'm not sure. And this machine that I'm on right now is not the one I installed it on, so I can't just pop out there and try it. But I've, for those of you in the chat room, I've given you all the links. You can go out there and find out for yourself. But so again, if you're curious about that kind of stuff, you've got Visual Studio Code and the PowerShell extension. So I promised we'd talk about PowerShell ISE. I've got like 3 PowerShell topics here. I've been trying to talk more about PowerShell just because I got away from it for a while, and I've actually got even more stories for next week, but I hit 3 this week. The second one was from the Scripting Guy podcast. So that is the Ed Wilson podcast on Microsoft. And he put out a podcast, or put out a blog post this weekend about using regions in PowerShell in the ISE. And it's one of those super simple, basic PowerShell 101 kind of things that is just such an obvious tip, but some people don't play with it, especially if you don't use the ISE a lot. And so I thought I would bring it up. So first off, I want to say that I've been using the ISE a lot lately, more so in the last year or so than I had in the previous 5, probably playing with PowerShell. The ISE, again, is the integrated scripting environment. I think these days you get that built in, but before you used to have to add it. You added PowerShell and then you had to add the PowerShell ISE separately. But like the name sounds, it's a scripting environment, and it's kind of an IDE for PowerShell. And I use it now for all of my PowerShell development. It does so many things. It does the parameter matching and the syntax matching and all that. But one of the things that Ed's blog post about this week was about the regions. And regions are something that coders, developers have been using for a while, but it's an ability to make a block of code in your IDE via block without it having to be an actual block of code, like an actual function with curly brackets on either side. You can easily collapse those inside of the ISE, but if you've got a bunch of things on a page or whatever, you can use regions to make blocks of code inside of the ISE collapse easily. So if it's a bunch of stuff that you don't want to have to scroll past all the time, you just put a region tag and collapse it. So it's pretty simple to use. It's just it's a pound region to start it, and that begins the region. You can give it a name. I highly recommend that. So hashtag region space and then name it something, and then at the end of that you want to do pound or hashtag end region, and then that's how the ISE knows what to collapse. And again, it's great for just chunks of code that you want to collapse so you don't have to scroll past them. One thing I will tell you about, though, it is not consistent with PowerShell in that it is case sensitive. And so you want to make sure that you have hashtag region all lowercase, and hashtag end region all lowercase, or it won't work out exactly the same. And then Ed, in his blog post, because Ed's just a super cool guy, talks about there you can use actual PowerShell on the bottom thing that will collapse that also. So you can control it obviously from the IC with the mouse, but if you don't want to do it with the mouse, you can also do it with code, with the toggle outlining expansion. So that's a good one. Again, just another feather to put in your hat. John Liu is talking about, it says in the chat room, is there questioning my IT pro credibility and saying that I'm becoming a developer. He says, I'm predicting that Todd will be talking about asynchronous REST anytime soon. I can tell you, John, that I absolutely had 2 different conversations today with 2 different different people inside of businesses at Rackspace where I brought up REST and talked about REST and gave examples of REST. So you're not too far from the truth. But again, that's kind of an IT pro thing these days. REST endpoints are things that we can use. So again, you're not too far from the truth there. I have been talking REST. Another thing that I'm going to talk about, and I don't have this on my notes, but I have finally started moving my PowerShell scripts up to GitHub. GitHub is a tool. It's a code, source control code repository that's everybody's using it. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but I suffer from the same thing that a lot of people do with PowerShell code. I'm bad at having it in one spot and keeping up the revisions. So I do have all that out in GitHub. I will be making that public soon. I need to clear up some of my coding. I'm ashamed of most of my PowerShell coding, but once I have that up, then I'll publish out my SharePoint and other PowerShell scripts for people to enjoy, and it'll be out on GitHub, so I'll be able to update it frequently and things like that. The last thing that I wanted to mention today was I follow a bunch of PowerShell people on Twitter, and I hang out with a bunch of PowerShell people in real life. Excuse me. One of them is Adam Bertram. Adam, I think his website is Adam the Automator or something like that. Big PowerShell guy. Him and I have been chatting for months on Twitter. We got to hang out a little bit at the MVP Summit, and that was good. But he really wants to get into the podcasting thing, and him and I have been kicking around doing a PowerShell podcast, and we still might. But he also has his foot in the door with the folks at the Twit Network. And just this afternoon, about 4 hours ago, he was on the Coding 101 podcast at Twit, and he and a couple other people were doing PowerShell-y things. And it's the second or third time he's been on there for that. Today's, that's funny. You're going to like this. Today's thing that he did was on hitting REST and, parsing through JSON and things like that. And he was on with a couple other people. So you can check that out at twit.tv. The show is called Coding 101. This was episode 92, but I know he's been on a couple of them before. And that was fun stuff. So I know he's hitting that hard, and he's trying to get more exposure there. And so if you get a chance, go out there and watch that. Robert Hostetler says that Microsoft's recommended add-on for full Visual Studio automatically shows all the color choices for Right Host. So that's interesting, Robert. I'll take a look at that. The one that I installed, again, is the one, and it was in Visual Studio Code where I did the install extensions and then PowerShell, and that was the one that came with that. It's not like I went out to, Crazy Jed's Visual Studio extensions and grabbed the first one that had PowerShell in it. So I will try this other one and see. But honestly, I'll probably stick with the ISE. I think the Visual Studio is a little too heavyweight for me. But we will see. I will add that to my notes, though. Everybody sit tight for a second. Don't go anywhere. Things and words. Blah, blah. Jeff Jones just dropped in the chat room, and he's like, my God, look at all this dev talk. Yeah, I'm keeping you guys on your toes. Expanding horizons and all of that. Now we're here at the end for the shameless self-promotion. Again, here in a couple of months, I'm going to be at SP TechCon. You can go to sptechcon.com. That is February 21st through 24th in Austin, Texas. I will only be there for a day. That same week, there's a big conference going on at Rackspace in San Antonio. So I'm going to do all my sessions at the beginning of SP TechCon and then drive down to San Antonio and try to hang out with those guys. So if you're going to be at SP TechCon, for goodness sakes, find me that first day. Come introduce yourself, shake my hand, and all that. Again, I talked about how I'm going to be on the Run As Radio podcast sometime the next month. That is at runasradio.com. We'll find out all about that. And then at the MVP Summit, started talking, folks. A lot of events already getting planned for next year. And so I will, as soon as I get confirmation on any of those, I've started talking to some folks. We'll see what I can do. So thanks everybody in the chat room. Stick around for a minute. We're going to talk about the Slack deal. Thanks to all of you who've listened. I tried to keep this one short. I'm working on making these things closer to a half an hour so that they're not so overwhelming and they're easier to consume. I know most of the podcasts I listen to, if I look at one and it's like 20 minutes, half an hour, I'll listen to it. If it's like 57 minutes, I'm like, I don't have time. So I'm going to try to start making these things short. So thanks for hanging on if you're still here. I will see you next week. If you're in the United States, eat lots of turkey, have lots of turkey leftovers, and I will see you on Monday. Thanks. Have a good night.